The fluorescent lights buzzed quietly inside the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation's lab in Jackson, throwing sharp shadows across Detective Sarah Mitchell's tired face as she studied the computer screen. After 32 years in law enforcement, Sarah thought she had seen everything, but at 3:47 p.m. on a hot and sticky Tuesday in August 2024, an email came in that made her hands shake as she reached for her glasses. The subject line read, DNA match, Case Duggar, 86-1247, urgent review required. That case number stopped her cold. Case 86-1247 had been buried for decades, tucked away in dusty boxes in the basement. No one had spoken about it in years. The victim's family had stopped calling long ago, their hope worn down by time and silence. And now, glowing on her monitor, was a message suggesting that a 38-year-old ghost had come back to life. The email came from Rebecca Torres, a young lab technician. She had written, "Detective Mitchell, I've run this through CODIS 3 times. The match is clear, 99.97% probability. But there's something else about this profile you need to see. Can we meet tomorrow morning?" Sarah didn't even notice her coffee had gone cold hours earlier. Her mind was already racing back to 1986, to a case that had shaped her early career and left scars that never faded. She remembered the victim's mother, Amanda Whitman, who had spent years begging for answers until grief turned into quiet resignation. Elena died in 2019, still carrying questions that were never answered. Sarah opened the old case file, which had been digitized 5 years ago during a cold case initiative, the screen filled with crime scene photos. The victim's bedroom was frozen in time, a half-eaten meal on the nightstand, textbooks scattered on an unmade bed, a diary left open with an entry written just 2 days before she vanished. And then Sarah saw herself in the old case records, a young detective, neatly pressed uniform, full of belief that justice always came if you worked hard enough. Now, silver streaks ran through her dark hair, and her reading glasses rarely left her face. She knew better. Some cases weren't solved in the first 48 hours. Some took 48 years. Her phone rang. The caller ID read Lieutenant James Rodriguez, her longtime colleague and current supervisor. "Sarah," he said. "The lab called. They said you asked for an emergency meeting about an old case. Please tell me this isn't about—" "It is," she interrupted, her voice low. "We got him, James. After all these years, we finally got him." The line went silent. Rodriguez had been a patrol officer in 1986, one of the first on the scene. He had watched the case destroy careers and faith in the system. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy. "Are you sure? Because if we're wrong—" "The DNA doesn't lie," Mitchell answered. But even as she said it, her stomach knotted. DNA was powerful, but it wasn't perfect. Evidence from the 1980s had been handled by dozens of people and stored in less than ideal conditions. Contamination was always a risk. Still, her instincts told her this time was different. This was the break they had waited for. On October 15, 1986 started out like any other crisp fall morning in Biloxi, Mississippi. The heat of summer had finally passed, the air was cool, and smoke from fireplaces drifted faintly through the streets. The maple trees on Magnolia Street were just starting to turn color. It was the kind of day no one expected to remember. That morning, 22-year-old Amanda Sue Whitman backed her yellow Honda Civic out of the driveway, just as she had every morning for the last 3 years. Amanda lived with a college roommate and was working toward her teaching degree at the University of Southern Mississippi's satellite campus. Her plan was simple: graduate and return home to Biloxi to teach elementary school, just like her mother had done. Amanda was the type of young woman a small town was proud of: polite, hardworking, and kind. On weekends, she volunteered at the local animal shelter. During holidays, she helped her mother at the family bakery, and every Sunday she sang in the church choir, her voice strong and beautiful during Amazing Grace. Her disappearance shattered everything. The first red flag came at 4:30 p.m. that Tuesday. Amanda never showed up at Magnolia Elementary, where she was completing her student teaching. Helen Morrison, the supervising teacher, waited 15 minutes before calling the office. Amanda had never been late once in 8 weeks. In fact, she usually showed up early to prepare lessons. By 6 p.m., panic set in. Amanda's roommate, Jenny Patterson, tried calling her again and again. No answer. Jenny drove the route between their home and the elementary school 3 times, hoping to spot the yellow Civic. Nothing. At 7:15 p.m., Amanda's mother, Elena, received the call while locking up the bakery. Jenny's voice was shaking as she explained that Amanda hadn't come home, hadn't called, and wasn't answering her pager, the one Elena had given her for emergencies. Elena tried to calm Jenny, suggesting maybe Amanda was at the library or helping someone. But deep down, Elena felt a cold dread. She knew her daughter. Amanda was responsible to the core. If she was late, she called. If she changed plans, she left a note. This wasn't her. The Biloxi Police Department was small, just 12 officers serving a town of under 4,000 people. Missing person reports usually involved teenagers sneaking off or elderly residents who wandered. The desk sergeant, Bobby Hutchins, had known Amanda since grade school. He reassured Elena, saying Amanda was probably just distracted, but Elena shook her head. Amanda didn't get distracted when it came to responsibility. That evening, search parties began to form. Neighbors, church members, students, all joined in. They searched for Amanda, or at least her yellow Civic. Everyone was sure daylight would bring answers. But by dawn, the car was still missing, and the town knew this was no simple disappearance. Amanda hadn't just been delayed. She was gone, and Biloxi would never be the same. Sheriff Thomas "Tom" Bradley, only 18 months into his term, got the call that morning. At 52 years old and a Vietnam veteran, he would soon face the most difficult investigation of his career. Sheriff Thomas "Tom" Bradley was a veteran who had come back to Mississippi hoping to keep his county calm. For him, law enforcement mostly meant dealing with bar fights, family arguments, or the occasional drunk driver, problems that could usually be solved with a stern talk or a night in the county jail. He had run for office on promises of community policing and smart budgeting, never expecting he would face a case that would test every resource his small department had. The Harrison County Sheriff's Department worked out of an old 2-story house on the edge of Biloxi. Its white paint was peeling, the wooden floors creaked with age, and years of tight budgets showed everywhere. Bradley's team was small. Detective Ray Morrison, a 20-year veteran, mostly handled property crimes. Detective Linda Hayes, recently transferred from the state police after a rough divorce, had asked for a quieter assignment. Neither had experience with a major missing persons case, much less one that was about to turn into something darker. By October 17th, Amanda's yellow Honda Civic was found abandoned in a truck stop parking lot 15 miles from town. The keys were still in the ignition. Her purse with her wallet and ID sat on the passenger seat untouched. The sight hit everyone hard. Cars don't just abandon themselves, and Amanda Whitman wasn't the kind of person to walk away from her life. Detective Morrison approached the Civic carefully, knowing he was stepping into the most important case of his career. At first, the car looked normal. No broken windows, no sign of a struggle. The doors were unlocked, almost like Amanda had planned to come back. But the moment Morrison opened the driver's door, he smelled it. The faint, metallic scent of blood, mixed with Amanda's perfume. Her mother later identified it as white shoulders, the fragrance Amanda had worn since she turned 16. Crime scene technician David Chen, only 2 years into the job, photographed the vehicle inch by inch. His care revealed the details others might have missed. 3 small drops of blood on the driver's seat, a broken fingernail lodged in the fabric of the passenger headrest, and most disturbing of all, Amanda's class ring wedged deep between the cushions as if it had been ripped from her hand. From 20 feet away, Sheriff Bradley stood silently watching. He had seen horrors during 3 tours in Vietnam, but nothing felt as personal as this. Amanda wasn't a stranger. She had babysat his youngest daughter. She had helped his wife Eleanor organize bake sales at church. She was a symbol of everything good about their community. The truck stop manager, Pete Kowalski, gave the only timeline they had. He swore the car wasn't there when he started his shift at 6 a.m. on October 16th, but he couldn't say when it arrived. With truckers and locals coming and going constantly, dozens of people might have seen the Honda, but in a busy place like that, most never looked twice at a parked car. Detective Hayes took on the difficult job of interviewing Amanda's family and friends. Her mother, Elena Whitman, sat in a cramped room at the sheriff's office, trembling as she answered questions about Amanda's daily routine, her relationships, and her dreams for the future. The investigation quickly overwhelmed the department's small staff. Within days, Bradley had officers pulling 18-hour shifts, burning through overtime the county couldn't afford. He called in favors from nearby departments, but help was limited. The state police offered assistance, yet their resources were stretched thin across rural Mississippi. In the end, Harrison County was mostly on its own. As October passed into November, the case began to feel grim. Weeks without answers changed the tone of the investigation. Then the first real suspect appeared, someone close to Amanda. Marcus Thompson, a 24-year-old mechanic, and Amanda's ex-boyfriend from sophomore year, became the center of attention. Witnesses reported seeing him at Rose's diner on the morning Amanda vanished, nervous and asking odd questions about her schedule. Their breakup had been friendly 8 months earlier, but Amanda's roommate Jenny admitted Marcus had been calling often in recent weeks, sounding desperate. Marcus lived with his sick mother in a small trailer outside town. When detectives showed up on November 3rd, his nervous energy set off alarms. He insisted he was working on a transmission repair that day, but when Morrison pressed him for details, his story fell apart. Marcus claimed he'd spent all of October 15th at Patterson's auto shop, but shop owner Earl Patterson said otherwise. Patterson remembered Marcus showing up that morning, but by noon, work had slowed. He had sent Marcus home, telling him to take the afternoon off. That left 4 unaccounted hours, the same hours Amanda disappeared. Sheriff Bradley approved a search warrant. On November 8th, a team searched Marcus's trailer. What they found seemed damning. A length of rope that looked freshly cut, magazines about missing persons cases, and, worst of all, a photo of Amanda. It had been torn from a yearbook, circled in red ink with angry handwriting scribbled in the margins. Marcus was brought in. The interrogation stretched to 14 hours. His story shifted again and again. He admitted to driving past Amanda's house that morning, hoping to see her. When detectives showed him the photo, he broke down crying, admitting he had never gotten over her and wanted another chance. "I loved her," he sobbed. "I'd never hurt Amanda." For 3 weeks, Marcus was the prime suspect. The Harrison County Herald ran daily updates, and public opinion turned against him. His mother got threatening calls, he lost his job, and he barely left the trailer, fearing attacks. Pressure on Sheriff Bradley to make an arrest grew daily. Yet deep down, Bradley wasn't convinced. Marcus's denials, despite the evidence, felt real. Then, on November 29th, the case against Marcus collapsed. Detective Hayes discovered something missed earlier. The photo of Amanda had been cut from a Harrison County High School yearbook. The angry handwriting was actually Marcus's clumsy attempt to draft a letter asking Amanda for another chance. And the rope. In Marcus Thompson's closet, investigators found a rope. At first it seemed suspicious, but forensic tests showed it was nothing unusual, just the type sold at any hardware store. More importantly, it hadn't been used recently and didn't match the fibers discovered in Amanda's car. But what truly shifted the case came from something unexpected: Amanda's personal diary. At first, detectives didn't pay much attention to it because most entries were about her daily life, school, and family. However, hidden in the pages written a week before she disappeared, Amanda had described a chilling detail. She wrote that she often felt someone was following her. She mentioned a dark sedan that seemed to appear wherever she went and how this uneasiness had been growing for weeks. The most critical line in her diary was this: "It's not Marcus. I know it's not him because I saw him at the diner while the car was following me home from class." This single entry cleared Marcus. In December, authorities quietly dropped all suspicion against him. But by then, the damage was done. His reputation and mental health had been shattered. The real kidnapper was still out there, and weeks of valuable investigation time had been wasted chasing the wrong lead. Detectives began to realize they might be up against someone far more intelligent and careful than they had first believed. For Detective Ray Morrison, Amanda Whitman's disappearance became more than just another case. By spring of 1987, 6 months after she vanished, it had turned into a personal mission that would define his career and his life for the next 30 years. While his co-workers moved on to other assignments, Morrison couldn't let go. His small office slowly filled with boxes of files and evidence, almost like a shrine to Amanda. His connection ran deeper because his own daughter, Sarah, was only 2 years younger than Amanda. Every time he looked at Amanda's photos, he thought of his own child. The image of Amanda's mother, Eleanor, sitting every night by her window waiting for headlights that never came home, haunted him constantly. Morrison worked 18-hour days, even after Sheriff Bradley unofficially reassigned him to other cases. His wife, Carol, at first understood his determination. She knew her husband's sense of justice wouldn't let him quit. But as months turned to years, their marriage began to fall apart. Their arguments grew painful. Carol often told him, "Ray, she's gone. You can't bring her back and you're destroying yourself." But Morrison couldn't explain to her that leaving the case felt like leaving Amanda behind. By 1990, he was known around town as the detective who never gave up, the man who refused to let Amanda's story fade. He kept in touch with Eleanor, calling her every few months to give updates, even though there was never anything new to report. For Eleanor, those calls mattered because at least someone still cared enough to keep looking. Morrison's methods grew more unconventional. On his days off, he drove through back roads in small towns across Harrison County, showing Amanda's photo to gas station clerks, waitresses, and anyone willing to look. He built friendships with long-haul truck drivers, asking them to keep Amanda's photo on their dashboards and call him if they ever heard anything. His glove compartment soon filled with dozens of business cards from truckers across the country. But his dedication came at a heavy price. In 1993, Carol filed for divorce, saying Ray had abandoned his own family emotionally. He didn't fight it. Deep down, he knew she was right. His daughter, Sarah, now in college, drifted away too. She stopped answering his calls, unable to compete with a missing girl for her father's attention. Morrison later admitted that losing his own daughter while searching for someone else's was the hardest loss of his life. Through the 1990s, his co-workers viewed him with mixed feelings. Some admired his devotion, others pitied him. Sheriff Bradley, who retired in 1994, sometimes dropped by and would always find Morrison surrounded by stacks of files, coffee cups, and the mess of a man who lived only for one thing: finding Amanda. When DNA testing arrived in the mid-1990s, Morrison believed it was the breakthrough he had been waiting for. In 1994, when Mississippi finally opened a state DNA lab, Morrison was one of the first to submit evidence. He personally drove Amanda's blood samples, preserved since 1986, to the lab in Jackson, treating them like sacred objects. The case went to Dr. Patricia Williams, a young forensic scientist newly trained by the FBI. She knew the pressure that came with cold cases and handled Amanda's samples with extreme care. The results gave both hope and frustration. The blood revealed a partial DNA profile. It wasn't Amanda's blood, proving foul play, but the profile was incomplete. Too many markers were missing, and the evidence wasn't strong enough for court. Morrison was both relieved and disappointed. Finally, he had scientific proof that Amanda had been attacked. But without a suspect, the evidence led nowhere. The partial profile was entered into CODIS when it went live in 1998. But no matches appeared. The killer's DNA was in the system, yet still faceless and nameless. Over the years, as DNA science improved, Morrison kept resubmitting Amanda's evidence, hoping technology would finally close the gap. Each new test raised his hopes, and Each failed result broke him down a little more, but still he never stopped. For years, investigators slowly pulled out new bits of genetic information from Amanda Whitman's case. Each test added a little more to the picture of her attacker's DNA. But the real problem never changed. They knew exactly what the man's genetic code looked like, but had no idea who he was. It was like having a fingerprint without a name. Detective Ray Morrison, who had built many theories about Amanda's killer using behavior studies and witness accounts, felt especially frustrated. The DNA results ruled out several people he once thought were strong suspects. Among them was a drifter arrested for similar crimes in nearby states, and a local man whose strange actions after Amanda vanished had made him a person of interest. Science had corrected Morrison's instincts in some cases, but it still gave him no direction on where to search next. For Amanda's mother, Eleanor Whitman, the DNA findings were both a relief and a heartbreak. She was grateful that the science proved Amanda had been the victim of foul play and had not simply chosen to disappear. But knowing her daughter's killer's DNA sat in a database without a match deepened her pain. Somewhere that man was living his life freely, while Amanda's life had stopped forever at age 22. By 2005, almost 20 years after Amanda went missing, the DNA had become both Morrison's biggest hope and his deepest disappointment. The technology that had promised so much had given them real evidence, yet it remained useless without a name. The profile was like a ghost in the files, clear and real, but impossible to touch. When 2018 arrived, Morrison was 63 years old and just 3 months away from mandatory retirement. That same year, the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation launched a new cold case unit, supported by federal funding. It was built with modern labs, digital case systems, and a team of detectives trained in advanced forensic methods. For Morrison, it was the kind of effort he had dreamed about for decades. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, the unit's commander, personally called Morrison to tell him Amanda's case was chosen for review. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of genuine hope, though tempered by the caution that comes with 3 decades of chasing shadows. Their first meeting took place in a bright, modern conference room, very different from the cramped space where Morrison had worked for years. Mitchell spread the case files across a polished oak table, carefully reviewing every detail like it was all new. Morrison noticed how she studied the photos of Amanda's abandoned Honda Civic without the emotional weight that still hit him, like a punch. "Detective Morrison," Mitchell said firmly, "you did outstanding work with what you had back then. The evidence you preserved, the witness statements, the timeline, they all give us a strong foundation, but we need to approach this case as if it's brand new." Mitchell's team brought skills that hadn't even existed in 1986. Detective James Rodriguez was a specialist in genetic genealogy, with 12 solved cold cases in just 2 years. Detective Karen Wu was a behavioral expert who had cracked patterns overlooked in older investigations. Together, they were equipped with tools Morrison could only have wished for in his early years. They began by digitizing every piece of evidence. Photos were enhanced with software to expose hidden details. Witness statements were fed into databases that highlighted links across multiple cases. Morrison was impressed and humbled, realizing his decades of effort had barely scratched the surface compared to what technology could now do. Rodriguez's genetic genealogy work quickly became the team's most promising lead. He used Amanda's partial DNA profile to search massive consumer databases built from ancestry tests. The process was slow and complicated, building family trees, eliminating false leads, but it had solved cases once thought hopeless. Reopening the case also came with emotional costs. Amanda's mother, Eleanor, had passed away in 2019 after 33 years of heartbreak. But Amanda's sister, Rebecca, now 48 and raising 3 children, stayed in close contact with Morrison. She wanted answers not just for herself, but for her children, who had grown up knowing only the absence of their aunt. As the team dug deeper, they confirmed what Morrison had long suspected. Amanda's disappearance wasn't random. It was a planned abduction. The notes in her diary about a dark sedan, The timing of her disappearance and the spot where her car was found all pointed to someone who had watched her for a while, likely someone local, and possibly someone who had done this before. Then came the call that changed everything. It was 6:00 a.m. on a Tuesday in August 2024 when Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell's phone rang. On the line was Dr. Rebecca Torres, the forensic geneticist leading the DNA search. Her voice was steady but filled with excitement. "Lieutenant Mitchell," she said, "I need you to come to the lab right away. We have a match." Mitchell froze for a moment. After nearly 40 years of dead ends, the words hit like a physical shock. She grabbed her badge and sidearm with trembling hands. The drive to the lab usually took her 45 minutes. That morning, she made it in 32. Dr. Torres was waiting in the conference room, surrounded by glowing monitors filled with genetic charts and sprawling family trees. She looked more excited than Mitchell had ever seen her. "Lieutenant," Torres said, "what I'm about to show you is going to change this investigation completely. The DNA has led us to someone you never suspected." On the main monitor, the family tree stretched across 4 generations of Mississippi roots, branching into Alabama and Louisiana. Torres had spent months narrowing it down, cutting away names, through age, location, and alibis. Finally, she had arrived at one man, the match Amanda's family had been waiting for since 1986. The name on the screen made Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell's stomach drop. William "Billy" Crawford, a 62-year-old retired maintenance worker who had spent his entire life in Harrison County. Crawford's name had never once appeared in the original case files, even though in 1986, the year Amanda Whitman vanished, he had been 24 years old and working for the county road department. That job would have given him inside knowledge of the back roads, remote spots, and hidden pull-offs where a crime could easily go unnoticed. Dr. Rebecca Torres had double-checked the genetic match through multiple databases. The odds of a mistake were less than 1 in 847 million. After 38 years, Amanda's killer had finally been identified. Mitchell sat frozen, staring at Crawford's photo. It was a recent driver's license picture. An aging man, thin with graying hair and pale blue eyes that seemed to look straight past the camera. There was nothing threatening in his face, nothing that would have warned a 22-year-old like Amanda that he was dangerous. He looked like countless other men in rural Mississippi, ordinary, forgettable, and exactly the kind of man who could blend into the background for decades. Mitchell's first call was to Detective James Rodriguez, who had been reviewing other unsolved cases from the same time period. When she told him the name, he was quiet for several seconds before finally saying, "Sarah, I think we may be looking at a serial killer." His words sent a chill through her. Rodriguez explained that the timeline and method lined up with at least 3 other unsolved disappearances from the late 1980s, all young women, all gone under similar circumstances. A background check painted a picture of a man who looked normal on the surface, but had likely been hiding dark secrets for decades. Crawford had been married for 34 years to a woman named Dorothy. They had 2 grown children living out of state. He had always worked steady blue-collar jobs, roadwork, landscaping, hardware stores. On paper, his life was uneventful. He had no criminal record other than a few traffic tickets. He had played the role of a respectable family man so convincingly that he managed to stay invisible for almost 40 years. But as Mitchell's team dug deeper, cracks began to show. Crawford had switched jobs often during the late 1980s and early 1990s, sometimes quitting suddenly with no reason. His work history showed gaps that lined up with the dates of several other unsolved disappearances in Mississippi and Alabama. Even more alarming, he had once worked for a landscaping company that maintained the truck stop where Amanda's abandoned Honda Civic was found. He would have known the layout, the traffic patterns, and the best times to move unnoticed. The DNA had finally cracked the case, but it also raised frightening questions. How many other victims had there been? How many families, like Amanda's, had been left waiting for answers that never came? Mitchell understood then that finding Amanda's killer might just be the beginning of exposing something much larger. Surveillance begins. The surveillance operation started at 4 a.m. on August 15, 2024. Detective James Rodriguez parked in an unmarked car across from Crawford's small ranch-style house on Elm Street in Biloxi. The property was nothing special, an aging home, on a corner lot surrounded by a rusting chain-link fence and overgrown shrubs. Rodriguez had already been monitoring the house for 3 days, carefully logging Crawford's movements. A man who had dodged justice for 38 years wasn't going to be brought down by sloppy police work. Crawford's routine was precise, almost mechanical. Every morning at exactly 6:15 a.m., he stepped out of his house, climbed into his faded blue Ford pickup, and drove to the same convenience store. There he bought coffee and cigarettes before heading to his part-time job at a hardware store. Rodriguez noticed the way Crawford avoided eye contact, always chose parking spots that offered quick exits, and constantly scanned his surroundings. He was cautious, hyper-aware, the habits of someone who had spent years worried about being watched. While Rodriguez tracked Crawford, Lieutenant Mitchell was preparing the legal side of the case. The DNA evidence was strong, but the prosecution would need more than that to secure a conviction. Any defense lawyer would question the chain of custody, possible contamination, or the use of genetic genealogy, something only recently accepted in Mississippi courts. The case had to be airtight. The search on August 18th at 5 a.m., a team of 12 investigators and forensic technicians executed the first search warrant on Crawford's home. Rodriguez watched from across the street as Crawford, wearing a bathrobe, answered the door. At first, his face showed only confusion. No fear, no panic, almost as if he had no idea why police were there. For a moment, Rodriguez questioned everything. Could they have made a mistake after all these years? But when Mitchell introduced herself and said Amanda Whitman's name, Crawford's expression changed instantly. The color drained from his face, his hands shook. He kept glancing toward the garage, a nervous tick Mitchell didn't miss. Inside, investigators discovered a locked toolbox. What they found inside erased any doubts. The box contained newspaper clippings about Amanda's disappearance, along with articles about other missing women from the late 1980s and 1990s. Every clipping was carefully protected in plastic sleeves and arranged by date, as if he had been keeping a scrapbook of his crimes. Most chilling of all was a photograph of Amanda, taken from a distance, showing her walking to her car outside the elementary school where she had been student teaching. She had no idea she was being watched. Detective Karen Wu, the unit's behavioral analyst, studied the items. This wasn't random, it was obsession. Crawford had stalked Amanda, studied her schedule, and planned every detail of her abduction. The forensic search turned up even more damning evidence. Soil samples from Crawford's backyard tested positive for lime, a chemical often used to cover the smell of decomposition. Ground-penetrating radar revealed disturbed soil in multiple spots, which would require excavation. And investigators found rope in his garage that matched the fibers recovered from Amanda's car, rope sold at the same hardware store where Crawford worked in 1986. The wife's story. The most devastating testimony came from Crawford's wife, Dorothy. During a painful interview with Mitchell, Dorothy admitted that her husband had shown violent tendencies throughout their marriage, especially in the late 1980s, when several of the disappearances had occurred. She described nights when Billy would leave the house for hours, coming home with dirty clothes and a foul mood. Then she shared the memory she had kept secret for nearly 38 years. I found Amanda's class ring in Billy's jacket pocket in late October of 1986, Dorothy whispered through tears. I knew something terrible had happened, but I was too afraid to say anything. Billy had a temper, and I knew what he was capable of. I've carried that fear and that guilt every single day. For 38 years, her words had been the critical link connecting William Crawford to the physical evidence found in Amanda Whitman's car. It was the kind of connection that defense attorneys would struggle to explain away. As the case grew stronger, Lieutenant Mitchell realized this wasn't just about solving Amanda Whitman's murder. They might be exposing one of Mississippi's most dangerous serial killers, a man who had lived quietly among them while taking multiple lives over decades. The arrest finally came on a humid Thursday morning in September 2024, exactly 38 years, and 11 months after Amanda Whitman was last seen leaving her rental home. At 6:00 a.m., just minutes before Crawford's usual time to leave the house, Detective Rodriguez and Lieutenant Mitchell approached his front door. Their timing was planned perfectly to catch him off guard. When Crawford opened the door expecting to start another ordinary day, he was instead confronted with the past he had hidden for nearly 4 decades. "William Crawford, you are under arrest for the murder of Amanda Sue Whitman," Mitchell announced, her voice carrying the weight of all the years that had led to this moment. What shocked everyone present was Crawford's reaction. Instead of denying it or showing anger, he calmly nodded and held out his hands for the cuffs, as if he had been expecting this very moment. "I wondered when you would finally come," he said quietly. Those words sent chills down the spines of every officer standing there. News of the arrest spread across Biloxi within hours, even before the press conference had been scheduled. Amanda's younger sister, Rebecca Whitman, now 48 and a mother of 3, received the call directly from Detective Mitchell. The call she had imagined for nearly 4 decades had finally arrived. Rebecca collapsed in her kitchen when she heard the words. Amanda's killer had been found. She had thought she would feel only relief, but what came instead was complicated grief. Relief that justice was finally here, but sorrow for all the years Amanda had missed. Birthdays, weddings, family gatherings, where her absence was always felt. Detective Ray Morrison, now 75 and living in a wheelchair after suffering a stroke, was also called by Mitchell. For over 30 years, Morrison had pursued Amanda's case, sacrificing his marriage, his bond with his daughter, and ultimately his health. When he heard Crawford's name, he broke down in tears. For the first time since Amanda disappeared, the man who had carried the case like a weight finally let his emotions pour out. Decades of frustration and determination released in a single moment. On the second day of his custody, Crawford gave a full confession. His words were delivered in the same calm, almost emotionless voice he used during his arrest. Sitting across from Mitchell and Rodriguez inside the Harrison County Sheriff's interview room, he explained Amanda's final day in chilling detail, as though he were describing someone else's life. He admitted that he had been watching Amanda for weeks, carefully studying her habits. On October 15, 1986, he tampered with her car in the elementary school parking lot, then appeared to offer help when it wouldn't start. "She was so trusting," Crawford said, his pale blue eyes fixed on the table. "She got in my truck, without hesitation because she thought I was helping her. She didn't realize until it was too late." His confession gave investigators long-awaited answers, but also raised disturbing new questions. Could Crawford have been behind other disappearances from the 1980s and 1990s? Several cases suddenly looked eerily similar to Amanda's. The reaction from the community was mixed. On one hand, people felt relief that Amanda's killer had finally been found. On the other, the thought that he had lived among them for all these years, working local jobs, attending events, shopping at the same stores was terrifying. Dorothy Crawford, his wife of 34 years, found herself caught between sympathy and suspicion. Many wondered how she could have lived with a killer for so long without suspecting the truth. The legal process moved faster than anyone expected. With his confession, DNA matches, and the physical evidence seized from his property, Crawford's attorney advised him not to fight the charges. On December 15, 2024, he pled guilty to first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. After nearly 4 decades, the case that haunted Mississippi was finally closed in court. But the story didn't end there. Authorities launched new investigations into at least 6 other unsolved disappearances from the same time period. Patterns in those cases strongly pointed to Crawford, raising the possibility that he had been one of the most prolific killers in the Southeast. For Amanda's sister Rebecca and retired Detective Morrison, the outcome brought long-awaited closure, but also a reminder of what justice delayed really means. Their decades of waiting had ended, but countless other families were still living in that same painful limbo. As 2024 came to an end, Amanda's case stood as both a victory and a warning. Even ordinary-looking men could hide monstrous secrets. The files that had consumed Detective Morrison's career were finally marked closed. Yet the unanswered questions about other victims kept driving investigators forward. Somewhere out there, other families were still waiting for their call, hoping that science and determination would one day bring them the peace that Amanda's loved ones had finally received after 38 long years. The Mississippi Cold Case Unit continues to ask the public for information. Even the smallest detail could help unlock decades of mystery and deliver long overdue justice to families who have waited far too long for answers.